Good morning, guys. So today's read aloud is going to be about oceans. There are 5 oceans on our planet. They're called the Pacific, Atlantic, Indian, Southern, and Arctic. And they cover our planet and they're all connected. All right, so we're going to learn some cool facts about them. Earth is called a blue planet because it looks blue from space. It looks blue because water covers about 3/4 of Earth. The blue areas on the map below show where water is on Earth. The largest areas of water are called oceans. So you can see all these blue areas on our map are oceans. That's water covering our planet. And then all the colorful spots are land where we live. We live on this green land here called North America. There are 5 oceans on Earth, from smallest to largest. They are the Arctic Ocean, the Southern Ocean, the Indian Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and the Pacific Ocean. Some ocean waters are warm, others are covered in ice. Could you guess where the cold oceans are versus where the warm oceans are? Up here in the Arctic Ocean, where the North Pole is and where it's always cold, right? Those would be cold oceans. Same with down here in Antarctica, where it's also covered in ice. That's where it would be really cold. And then in these middle spots, that's where you would find these really warm oceans. There are 4 main directions on Earth. The 4 main directions are north, south, east, and west. The most northern place on Earth is the North Pole. The most southern place on Earth is the South Pole. In areas near the North Pole and the South Pole, ocean waters are cold or frozen. Areas near the equator are always hot. The equator is an imaginary line that separates the Earth into 2 equal parts. The oceans near the equator are very warm. So you can see on this diagram the warms, the temperatures. This map shows us temperatures. So here where it's red hot versus here where it's blue icy cold. The 5 oceans make up one big world ocean because they are all connected to one another. The waters are always moving. As wind blows across the top of the oceans, it pushes the water. The water moves in waves. As the water moves, it helps heat the air and land in winter and cool the air and land in summer. Seas are parts of oceans that are close to land. The South China Sea and the Caribbean Sea and the Mediterranean Sea are 3 very large seas. The water in both oceans and seas is salt water, and salt water has a lot of salt in it. Half of the world's supply of oxygen is made in the oceans. Remember, oxygen is the air or the gas that we breathe. Oxygen is the part of the air that animals and people need to breathe. The oxygen in oceans is made by phytoplankton, which are tiny plants too small to see with just our eyes. Many kinds of ocean animals eat these tiny plants as well. Some parts of the ocean are very deep and some are shallow. Parts of the ocean that are shallow receive a lot of sunlight. Sunlight travels down through the water, but it cannot reach the deep zones or sections. Remember we learned about the zones of the ocean? So in the sunlit zone or in the top zone, there's lots of light available. Plants need light to make food. They can only survive in the sunlit zone, the top zone of the ocean. Most of the animals that live in oceans live in the top zone. Very little sunlight reaches the twilight zone. The water here is cold as well as dark. And in the midnight zone, the water is very dark and almost freezing cold. These pages show some animals that live in different zones. So you can look at some of these animals that live in the sunlit zone. Here are some animals that live in the twilight zone. And here are some animals that live in the midnight zone where there's no light. The Arctic Ocean is the smallest and shallowest of the 5 oceans. It surrounds the North Pole and touches the continents of Europe, Asia, and North America, parts of the United States, Canada, Russia, Iceland, Norway, and Greenland touch the Arctic Ocean. This polar bear is sitting on top of an iceberg. An iceberg is a piece of ice that has broken off a glacier and is floating in the water. A glacier is a slow-moving river of ice that has formed on land. So in the Arctic Ocean, you can see here it's very cold, and there's lots of ice and icebergs that float around that different animals live on. Many kinds of fish and other animals live under the ice in the Arctic Ocean. Octopus, squid, and sea jellies are just some of these. Whales also live in the icy waters. They have thick layer of blubber or fat under their skin to keep them warm. Some whales leave the Arctic Ocean in winter, but narwhals and beluga whales stay unless the ocean freezes over completely. We also see polar bears and some cool birds like Arctic terns. The cold Southern Ocean surrounds the South Pole and the continent of Antarctica. It is the second smallest of the 5 oceans and is at the opposite end of the Earth from the Arctic Ocean. There are seas around Antarctica, so you can see the map below. Plenty of penguins. The Arctic and Southern Ocean are not very different from one another. Both are covered with ice for most of the year. Seals, whales, and some seabirds live in both oceans. Penguins live in the Southern Ocean, but they do not live in the Arctic Ocean. Polar bears live in the Arctic Ocean, but not in the Southern Ocean. So down in the Southern Ocean is where you're going to find penguins. Penguins actually live on the South Pole. The Indian Ocean is the third biggest of the Earth's 5 oceans, and it is also the warmest. The Indian Ocean touches the continents of Australia, Oceania, Africa, and Asia. And the Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, and Southern Ocean flow into the Indian Ocean. There are thousands of islands in the Indian Ocean. The country of Indonesia, for example, is made up of 17,508 islands. I think this is the beach I would like to go to. That looks warm. The Indian Ocean has many islands and coral reefs. Most coral reefs grow close to islands and were created by volcanoes. Coral reefs are huge underwater structures found in warm tropical waters. They are habitats with many kinds of fish and other animals. A habitat is a natural place where animals live. Corals look like rocks or colorful plants, but they are made up of tiny animals called coral polyps. Look at all the beautiful, colorful coral and all the beautiful, colorful animals that live in the warm oceans. The Atlantic Ocean is the second biggest ocean on Earth. And so, because you see how it stretches really long from the North Pole down to the South Pole? So, in the middle is where you'll get nice warm beaches. And in the north part of the Atlantic Ocean and the southern part of the Atlantic Ocean is where you'll get places with ice, see? The water in oceans is always moving. Currents like rivers of water that flow through oceans. Warm currents that flow from tropical oceans warm up the temperate and polar oceans. Cold currents that flow from cold oceans cool down the water in tropical areas. The Gulf Stream is a fast Atlantic Ocean current that brings warm water from Florida up the east coast of North America, and then it crosses the Atlantic Ocean, warming the climate of Western Europe. So the water in ocean is always moving, and the cold water and warm water work together. The Pacific Ocean is the biggest ocean on Earth, and it takes up about 1/3 of the Earth's surface and is larger than all the land on Earth put together. The Pacific Ocean stretches from the Arctic Ocean to the Southern Ocean, and it contains between 20,000 and 30,000 islands. The Pacific Rim is made up of countries and cities that are located on the edge of the Pacific Ocean. Do you know any of these places? So I think if you look in this picture, you will see something from Finding Nemo. This is in Australia, in Sydney, Australia. Oceans can be dangerous places. Hurricanes form over oceans, and when those big storms come, they can destroy towns and cities. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina came and it caused massive damage in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. And then in April 2010, there was an explosion of oil rigs under the ocean that caused hundreds of millions of gallons of oil to leak into the ocean. That oil was very dangerous and it killed animals in the ocean and on the shore. You guys can imagine oil, it's really thick and gross and yucky. You don't want that spilled in the ocean. And many of those animals became sick from that. Luckily, we were able to clean it up. And that's the end of our book. All right, so that was a lot of information about all of the oceans that cover our planets. But there's two oceans that are on the top and the bottom that are really cold. And then there's oceans in the middle that are really warm. So if you're planning a beach vacation, you might want to plan to visit one of the warm oceans in the middle. But if you're on the lookout for penguins or polar bears or narwhals, you might want to visit one of the top or bottom, the North Pole or South Pole oceans.